And welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. I am Dotun Adebayo. I'm in London, and the Legendino, Tim, you are?
I'm in Rio, enjoying the sunshine and enjoying the chance to go back to the end of May 1962. We're going to pay tribute to one of the all-time greats of the game, and we're going to talk about a world on the cusp of modernity. Do you know where?
Like
Do you know where the Beatles were at the end of May 1962?
Yeah, because they'd have gone into the charts with "Love Me
No,
Do."
no.
Oh,
The
this
end of
is
May.
before that.
The end of May 62.
Are they
They're
still in
still
Berlin?
in Hamburg. They're
Hamburg, of
just
course.
about to come back right at the start of June.
Yeah.
And their first demo for Parlophone, still with Pete Best, is June the 6th. So just a few days after this game that we're talking about. So the Beatles are about to lead the musical world and the Sartora world as well. There's so much. They're about to lead it towards modernity. Meanwhile, there's someone on the football field doing a similar thing with football. And I refer, of course, to the great Mario Zagallo, who left us on Friday at the age of 92.
Yeah, and a huge loss for Brazil. We saw the pictures here of people at his funeral, for example, and I know you've been very busy talking about him over the last few days. It's not always that we focus on one person. Well, it's very rare, actually. We focus on one person for a Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. But I think today, the person we're focusing on, Zagallo, warrants a Brazilian Shirt Name all of his own, I think.
No doubt about it. I mean, he is. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that he and Pelé have equal weight in those years between 58 and 70, when Brazil win 3 World Cups out of 4 and become the country of football. And back before the 58 World Cup, they were third in their own continent, behind Argentina and Uruguay. By 1970, they're the country that everyone wants to be. Now, obviously, the poster boy for this is Pelé. Genius, arguably the best player ever to have played the game. Sensational player. But talent never wins on its own. Talent wins with hard work and organisation. And so much of that came from Zagallo. You know, when they won the 70 World Cup together, with Zagallo as the coach by now, it was often compared to the moon landing in 69, just a few months earlier, because both are seen as like almost pinnacles of human achievements. And the 70 World Cup was the first that was seen in much of the world on TV. And those images from Mexico shimmering in the afternoon sunshine, they had a kind of magical quality, a little bit like the images from the moon landing. So if Pelé is the Neil Armstrong, he's the one getting all the glamour.
Oh no, not Buzz Aldrin. No,
that's Buzz Aldrin. He is.
No.
He even had a buzz cut for quite a long time. It works.
The reason why I say no, I know that a colleague of mine interviewed Buzz Aldrin on one of the radio stations I work for, and she asked him, I mean, she asked him a lot of questions, but she asked him how he feels about, being the second person to land on the moon. And you could tell that it still bugs him.
Wow.
Well, imagine going around the world and people say, next, I'd like to introduce you, ladies and gentlemen, to one of the most famous people in the world, the second person to land on the moon. I mean, he went all the way there and to be the second. And he's never gotten over it. He's still alive. I mean, he's well into his 90s by now. Yeah. Still alive. But I always feel like, if you've ever seen that Hollywood film Amadeus about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a brilliant film, by the way, and a huge, brilliant stage production that they had at the National Theatre a few years back in London. But in that, the nemesis of you couldn't even call him a nemesis, really. But the juxtaposition to Mozart is this composer called Salieri. At the beginning of the film, they're wheeling him around this nut house, and he's saying, "I am the patron saint of the mediocre," because Amadeus was so good that everybody else in comparison was mediocre. And that's the thing. Neil Armstrong, I'm sorry, he didn't speak very much. He tended to sort of keep his own counsel. He never really spoke about the moon journey. He was a professor of physics, I think it was, in one of the universities in the States. Never, loads of people signed up for his course. He never ever spoke about it. But Buzz Aldrin, that dominates. So the reason why I made that anecdote was to ask, first of all, if we talk about the human being, was Zagallo, he must have been very aware that he was second in the international world's eyes to Pele at the very least.
And very happy to be there.
Really?
Yeah, no worries whatsoever about that. This is unlike what you're telling me about Armstrong and Aldrin. This is a story of complementary talents. There's no competition between these two whatsoever. None at all. Zagallo was later in life, and I knew him reasonably well. He was fabulous, actually, with journos. Fabulous with me. And he could be spectacularly vain. And he had no doubt whatsoever of Pele was a far, far better player. And his job was to make up the team in a way that supported Pele. Zagallo, he was on military service in the Maracanã Stadium in 1950 when Brazil lose to Uruguay. He's a teenager, burning with ambition, thinking, I want to be there. I want to be out there. I want to be out there. I want to be playing for Brazil in a World Cup. But he thinks, you know what? He was a number 10. I can't do it. I'm not good enough to get into the national team as a number 10. So what I want to do, how can I get in? I'm left-footed. I'm going to play on the left wing. So he became a left winger. Now, he was well aware that in terms of talent, he wasn't even Brazil's best left winger. But what he could do was serve the interests of the team, both with the ball, because he wasn't going to do anything too flashy. He was told by one of his coaches, don't dribble, get that cross in early. In fact, he makes one of the goals for Pelé in the final of '58 against Sweden. But crucially, he runs back. He makes the extra man in midfield. Now, that's something that everyone does these days. But he was years ahead of his time. So that was the differential that he had over more talented left wingers. They would play in 40, 50 meters and he would play in 80. And he'd funnel back when his whole career is dominated by the invention of the back four. Brazil pioneered the back four, which means that they pull another player back into the heart of defense to give them extra cover. So you've got 4 at the back. You've got 4 up front, 2 wingers and 2 strikers. Do the maths. That only leaves 2 in the middle of midfield. They've got an enormous amount of space to cover. So what Zagallo does is he's the one who funnels back and covers. And that's why he was called the Little Ant. And I couldn't, but the first time I met him, and when I moved out to Brazil, he wasn't really remembered by the foreign press. He was remembered by the Brazilian press. And I was desperate to get an interview with him. And I was no one at the time. I had no one to sell it to. But I went and got an interview with him. I just looked at him. I just couldn't. Tiny little figure, tiny little old man. This fella won the World Cup twice as a player. How could he? He was a little ant, and he worked and he worked and he worked, and he balanced the side out. And the reason that I've chosen the game against Mexico in the '62 World Cup, it's the first game of Brazil's campaign, is that the '62 World Cup, in the '62 World Cup, he's even more important than he was in '58. Brian Glanville, same age, our greatest international football writer, I think, has always argued that this World Cup goes down as the World Cup of Garrincha, but it's equally the World Cup of Zagallo, because Brazil essentially, they take to the '62 World Cup exactly the same team that had gone to '58. They were an old team. There's Pele. I don't think there's anyone else under 29 in that team. It's an old team that they take there, and they're still playing the same system. On the left back, Nilton Santos is 37. So in this World Cup, they really, really need Zagallo to work back. And he told me himself that the coach for this World Cup, Amore Moreira, told him at the start, I don't want you to work back. I want you to stay up the field. And Zagallo thought, well, I ain't doing that. We can't do that. We can't afford to. So he took it on himself to disobey his own coach's instructions and to work back into the midfield. And it turned out to be exactly what the team needed. And this is the game where, because Pele is injured in the next match and plays no further part in the tournament. So here you're seeing Zagallo and Pele together, really for the last time in a competitive match, because early in the next game against Czechoslovakia, Pele injures himself. They don't play that close together because Pele is the second striker and he will fall more to the right of the pitch, whereas Zagallo is the left winger. But they can work together through crosses, like the cross that Zagallo gave for Pele in 58. And in this game, where Pele is off the scale, it's Pele at the absolute peak of his powers. They have to work hard for the first goal. Mexico's goalkeeper is a legend, Carvajal. He's playing in the 4th of his 5th World Cups, and he takes some beating. So they really have to work for the first goal. And Pele is doing everything but score. And they can't get that first goal. And it finally comes when it's Pele breaking down the right and crossing, and Zagallo just appearing in the penalty area exactly at the right time to head it back across goal. 1-0. Brazil are on their way to defending their title.
You see, when you put it like that, I suddenly realize, oh my goodness, because the picture you paint now is not the obvious picture that you get from seeing this. The names that pop out at me, Zagallo, I know through your telling us about Zagallo in the past, but otherwise I'd be looking at Pele, who's central striker, and I'd be looking at Garincha. Go on, you tell me. Gahincha, that's how you pronounce it. But we used to call him Garincha. That was it.
That'll do.
Yeah, Garincha. But he's on the right wing. Yeah. So I'm focused more on that. And you can see that he's a dribbler, old school dribbler, obviously. Yeah, you see a little bit of the old look. I'll pass it.
Did you notice that it's always one at a time?
Exactly, because they're lining
it's
up.
Always Bruce Lee.
On. Yeah. Who's next? And but he did one of those old school passes I've not seen, which was he was on the right wing, on the far right wing, and the defender was facing him, and he passes it around the right-hand side of the defender, and he runs around the left-hand side. Yeah. I'm not thinking nobody else even came to collect the ball when he passed it on the around the outside. There was ages of space and time to collect it. But the little subtle input, if you like, from Zagallo was lost on me. I was sitting there wondering, why did Pele, as you say, was scintillating. He was literally waltzing his way through the midfield and, well, certainly the defense of the Mexicans. But I completely missed out on the importance.
Well, you would have to see the entire game, and just because Brazil were a little bit vulnerable defensively because they're so old, So without Zagallo keeps
in '62, they were old already.
Oh yeah, it's an old side. Everyone
apart from Pele. Yeah.
Okay. And then when he goes, Amadildo comes in. Everyone else is 29 or over. It is an old side, and that was older in those days than it is today. So with it, what Zagallo does is the unglamorous stuff to keep getting back, creating the extra man in midfield, and making that system viable. And it's a role. It's the
Michael Carrick role, isn't it? Sorry, apologies. That's kind of, I was thinking unglamorous. It's not quite, but yeah, it's kind of like Michael Carrick. Well, if you don't watch carefully and think about his position, you think, well, why is he in there?
And exactly this. So Zagallo was always revered by coaches, because coaches could see, blimey, look what this fella is doing. The fella who won the World Cup with France in '98, Jacquet, he said Zagallo was a player with two shirts, because he was an attacker when Brazil were attacking, and a defender when Brazil were defending. And this is miles ahead of the curve. I actually think, and Alf Ramsey never admitted it, because he never would. He was a dyed-in-the-wool nationalist. But what Alf Ramsey did in '66 had a huge influence of Zagallo, because Ramsey did away with the formal wingers, and he had Alan Ball one side and Martin Peters the other. Now, they did the work of wingers, but they would also funnel back into midfield to provide cover and give a platform for the best player in the team. That's Bobby Charlton. And the influence of Zagallo there as a player is absolutely clear. But because it's unglamorous, coaches are going to notice it, but the general public aren't. And he's all right with that. He's you know, he knows that he wasn't even the most talented left winger. Where I think he was a bit more bitter. Bitter is too harsh, I think. But where his role, I think, many haven't understood, is when he's coach in 1970. What he does to that team in 1970, because he only takes charge 3 months before the World Cup, so he hasn't got long, and he makes massive changes to the team. And there's this view, it's almost like conventional view of Brazilian football, that they could have won without a coach. You know, just get 11 off the beach and put them on, and that is so far from the truth. And what he does with that team, he inherits a team that are still playing old style 4-2-4. And he says, no way. That was already outdated when I was a player. So we're going to have to do something else. So he had preparation time that you don't have these days, but the squad were together for months. So he had lots of games, and he gradually worked his way towards what they did in 1970, which was essentially, and he was quite happy to accept this label, a 4-2-3-1, a modern 4-2-3-1. He withdraws he didn't trust his centre backs, so he withdraws one of his midfielders, Piazza, to the heart of the defence. That opens up space for young Clodoaldo as a holding midfielder, who's dynamic and talented and really gives you lung power. He drops a left winger, and he brings in Rivellino. Rivellino wasn't in the team, and he brings in Rivellino to be a kind of version of what he had been as a player, a kind of false left winger, with more talent, with less of a winger in him perhaps, but with more talent in that left foot. And he organises the team in such a way that when they lose the ball, only Tostão was ahead of the line of the ball. Everyone else comes behind the line of the ball, so they're compact and difficult to play through. I remember talking to some of the old timers, some of the ones who played 1950, and they thought this was too defensive. They didn't like it. I was with them. I took Gary Lineker to meet them, and Lineker said, "What? 1970 side too defensive because he's more Midland in real." He couldn't get his head around it. You know that people thought that the 70 side was too defensive, and obviously it wasn't. But it was, and this is the key word in any discussion of Zagallo. It was balanced. The balance. He is the symbol of the quest to balance attack and defense. And defensively, I think individually they weren't that great, the 70 side, but they were hard to play through, and also they were fit enough. They were a very, very fit side, and so that they just, especially in the second half, they toyed with all comers, and it's seen as one of the truly great international teams. And that is, yes, credit to the players and Pelé and his supporting cast, but it's also huge credit to Zagallo.
I get it now. I do get it now. When you explain it, it does take a bit of explaining, but you can forgive me if Gary Lineker didn't get it, then why should I have got it? I do remember at the time, so I'd have been 10 or 11 years old at the time, and by this World Cup, at this point, probably 10 actually. But anyway, I remember where I grew up in North London, we already thought that Brazil was the best team in the world, and the cultural resonance from that, or at least the historical resonance from that, was that we grew up knowing that no team had ever won the World Cup 3 times, and the first team to win the World Cup 3 times would keep the Jules Rimet trophy, as it was then, the one with the wings on.
It ain't gleaming no more. They got stolen and melted down, but there you go.
Well, yeah, these things happen, mate. You know, people got to eat, haven't they? And the robbers have got to steal. But that 1970 World Cup, when Brazil actually basically fulfilled the destiny that we had imposed upon the team, you know, the world has already said, look, they've got Pelé, they're going to win the World Cup. When they fulfilled that destiny, the last thing you were thinking about was, oh, how did the tactics change?
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
It was just blistering football from us. You mentioned Rivellino on the left wing. Now I get that. I totally see what you mean about him being a sort of a slightly younger or more modern version of
Of Zagallo, the player.
Yeah, Zagallo, yeah, the player. But you haven't told us how he transformed from being a player in 60. Well, they were kicked out of the World Cup in '66, weren't they?
Yeah, and he'd gone by then. He'd suffered a serious injury, and he was already 30, 31 at the time of the '62 World Cup. So he didn't have long. And the last game for Brazil he played was '64.
Yeah, I should clarify, by the way, when I say they got kicked out of the World Cup, I meant they got physically kicked out of it. Yeah,
yes,
physically kicked out of it.
And then he's one of those players who's always going to become a coach. Although this is a great story. When he was at Flamengo as a player, he moved in the mid-50s from Flamengo to Botafogo. He nearly stayed at Flamengo because Botafogo came in with an offer and they were going to pay him more. And he went to the people at Flamengo and he said, I've got this offer. I will stay at Flamengo, even though Botafogo are going to pay me more. I'll stay at Flamengo earning what I'm already earning now. Because you're very influential people, you Flamengo directors, if you can fix me up with a steady bank job when I'm retired. That was the status of footballers back then. When he met his wife, he was married for like 60 years or something. He took a long time before actually telling her that he was a professional footballer. It's amazing how the status. But he was always going to become a coach rather than a bank worker, I think. And he was still a young coach when 1970 came around. They sacked the coach with 3 months to go, and so there was this vacancy. And he wasn't the first choice. No, two turned it down. And he would never turn anything like that down in his life. I remember speaking to him about, because he was still coaching '74, where Pele wouldn't play. And Pele was only 33 at the time. He could easily have played that World Cup, but he was earning his money in the States, and he had a deal with a soft drink manufacturer, and he wouldn't play. Zagallo, he just could not believe that anyone would do this. Couldn't believe it. That you would have the opportunity to play for Brazil in the World Cup. And he said to me, and he's 75 when he says this. He says to me, well, it's not a decision that I would have taken. And I said to him, you'd play now if they picked you. And he said, too right. I wouldn't run around very much, but I'd play. And that was Zagallo. I mean, the first half of his life there, as player and coach, he's a symbol of the balancing out the team. And then on his coaching end in '74, comes back. He's assistant coach, but very important in '94 when they win. He is the coach in '98 when they lose to France in the final, and he's assistant coach one last time in 2006. So he goes on and on and on. And if you cut him, he bled yellow and green. He in the second half of his life, he's just a symbol of absolute unconditional love to the Brazilian national team. And sometimes he ramped up the nationalism, I think, a little bit too much. But it did kind of make him endearing. I mean, in '98, I remember that great semi-final against Holland. It went to penalties. And he's coming onto the field. He's yelling at the players, we're going to win this, we're going to win this, we're going to win this. He's yelling at them. And he does look very disheveled. He looks like someone who's run away from an OAP's home, But there was something really charming about it. And the players, even these later generation players, absolutely loved him. They had real love for him. And so many of them turned up on Sunday for his wake and his funeral and so on. And it was really touching to see the links that players like Bebeto, for example, the love that they have for Zagallo, and so we really are saying farewell to one of the all-time greats, one of the most influential names in the history of the game.
I do want to talk about what you promised us about the sort of cultural context of Zagallo's time as both player and coach for Brazil, winning World Cups. But just if we can go back to the match, because that's what we do here at the Brazilian Journey podcast. We look at an iconic match from sometime in the firmament of football history, and discuss it and take a look back at it and revisit it, if you like, with the benefit of hindsight, which we fortunately have, but we won't have it forever because the next generation will have the benefit of hindsight, if you see what I mean, and on and on and on and on and on. So I've just heard that Frank Beckenbauer's died. Have you just got that?
No, I
Frank
haven't seen that.
Beckenbauer. The World Football Phone is going to be like tonight. I think it's
Indeed.
1966 all over again, mate.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the match itself, so the match that we're talking about is Brazil versus Mexico, 1962 World Cup, which means it's in Chile. And from what you see, from the evidence that we see, certainly it looks like Brazil's on the front foot for most of the match,
Yeah.
and Mexico, like you said earlier on, is just trying to stop them. With the benefit of a decent goalkeeper and one or two decent defenders as well along the way. 30th of May. Sorry, it's
That's it. 30th
it
of
was
May.
30th of May. 30th of May, 1962. Great goals. One by Zagallo. Well, that was a good header, but for the smallest man on the pitch as we know he is now, it was a great header. But the Pele one, I mean,
it's unbelievable, isn't it? For me,
yeah.
this is it's been overlooked because it happens in the World Cup where he's injured in the next game. But for me, this is my favourite of all Pele's World Cup goals. It is like watching, is it Brian Glover in Kes? You know, when you're watching someone who looks like an adult against little kids, and he just goes through the entire defence, left foot, right foot. There's one point where he kind of brings his legs together to make a block and carry on with the ball. It is extraordinary. It's a fantastic goal, and with a controlled finish at the end of it. So anyone who hasn't seen this is easily available on YouTube. Have a look at the goal that Pele scored against Mexico in 30th of May 1962, because I think it stands up there with, for me, it's my favourite of his World Cup goals.
And forgive me, I'm so puerile. The moment you mentioned Brian Glover in Kes, what I was thinking of was hands off cocks and onto socks. I don't know why.
No wonder you burned the school down, is it? Really?
Well, for goodness'
you can
sake.
read about that and other adventures in Effries.
Yeah, 5 stars all the way on Amazon, so you can't knock it till you tried it. But okay, so what is the cultural resonance? I saw these dramatic photographs of people in Brazil on the streets carrying his coffin. It looked like, I think it's not an exaggeration to say, it was like a presidential cortege or something like that.
No, I think that's entirely fair. Well, football and the Brazil teams of this time are the greatest ambassadors that Brazil has ever produced. It's the moment that everyone wants to be Brazilian, isn't it? During these World Cups, look at them, look at the spontaneity and the wonderful physical expression. That's why I put it a little bit like the moon landing. It seems to be like in a different way, but it's almost like a pinnacle of human achievement. And obviously, the contrast is between that and where they are at the moment, when they're administrative chaos. They're 6th in South America in World Cup qualification. So I think that means that there's even a more desire to bask in nostalgia for a while. And all right, when someone of 92 leaves us, it's not a tragedy. It's more of an opportunity, I think, to celebrate a fantastic life.
100%. It's funny what you say, though, about when everybody wants to be Brazil, because, by this time, certainly by the 74 World Cup, you start seeing amongst all the cheering Brazilian fans at the World Cup, you start seeing a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Swede in the midst of them, spectator, looking somewhat lost, with a Brazil shirt, of course. Yeah, it's the footballers were the cultural ambassadors. That's all we knew about Brazil, apart from Brazil nuts, which I don't even know if they come from Brazil, but they're called Brazil.
Yeah, I think they're from the north.
You know what's so intriguing about Brazil nuts? They're the only mass product, certainly the only mass product nuts that are grown in the wild. They're not farmed. Do you know that? Yeah,
I didn't know that. No.
Well, if
in
you
Brazil,
see
they're
the
known
size of
as
the
nuts
trees.
from Pará, Castanha Pará. Pará is a state in the north of Brazil. So if Panama hats don't come from Panama, they come from Ecuador. but Brazil nuts do come from a state in
Okay,
Brazil.
fair enough. You're okay there. That Panama, is that true about Panama
It's true.
hats?
It's true.
No
Yeah,
way.
it was. But they caught on when with the states, they were building the Panama Canal,
Yeah, yeah.
and lots of workers were using them. I think Teddy
Oh, I
Roosevelt was the
get it.
president. He went down there and used one, and it kind of caught on with a link to Panama. But they come from Ecuador.
Yeah, you see, I thought they were just easy to sell as Panama, Panama,
No,
Panama,
I've
Panama.
avoided falling down that rabbit hole.
Well, you lucky you. I always fall down it. I don't even know how to say it. But yeah, does it continue? Does football and other footballers till today, the main cultural ambassadors?
Well,
For,
I think they probably are. They haven't got anyone like Pele, but Pele doesn't, and that's obviously that's the burden. That's where the bar is set for future generations, and it's been hard for future generations to live up to that. That desire, that obsession with success first and success in style second. It's proved a very, very high bar to live up to. And I always remember now when they hosted the World Cup in 2014, and the first knockout game with Chile, it goes to penalties. And Thiago Silva, Chelsea's the captain. And all right, we're going to penalties. So what's the captain going to do? He's going to be there organising, rallying the troops and so on. And Thiago Silva was just on his own, sitting on a football, crying his eyes out. Thinking it's just it's too much for them. It's way too much for them. And that is the bar that Zagallo and Pele and their generation set. If you fall short of that, you're going to be attacked. And they were all, I think, one of the reasons for the psychological collapse of that team is the realization that they're not going to be able to live up to the demands and expectations. So it hasn't been easy for subsequent generations.
yeah, in terms of Thiago Silva, his missus has been all over social media this week. I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't.
Um,
No, she's a bit odd, I think, but she's been with him through thick and thin.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even think she was particularly odd. You know that better because you can parlay the lingo. But she took a picture of how much their restaurant bill was after Chelsea had won a match. Have a guess.
No idea. Go on.
Go on, have a guess anyway.
Why would you do that?
I know, I couldn't
Why
understand
would you
that.
share
And
that?
she circled the total. She circled it in red ink or something like that and focused on that. Anyway, it was 900 quid, which I didn't even think was that much. I mean, it's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of money. I've never spent 900 quid in a restaurant, but I was expecting it to be like 10 grand or something like that. Then I was like, whoa, because the whole point of the news articles was, look at these footballers, look how, spendthrift they are and stuff. Anyway, final point though, of when you spoke to Zagala, which was his proudest moment? Was it as a footballer or as a coach?
He was proud of all of it, of absolutely all of it. He loved how 62 had perhaps belatedly been recognised. I think he appreciated it was all before the age of mass TV, and 70 wasn't. So I think he would probably choose 70. But it's nice to have 4 World Cup wins to look back and say, which one is your favourite kid, isn't it?
Oh, was it 4?
Well, he was assistant coach in '94 when they won there, and he was very important to the cause. Really, really important. So he's the only one with 4. Even Pele doesn't have 4. So this is where Buzz Aldrin leaps over Neil Armstrong and goes to another planet.
Fair enough. Yeah, and with all respect to Mario Zagallo, because I didn't know the history as well as you've told it to us. Okay, the other aspect of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, for those who don't know, I know you know, Tim, is that we look at the sort of musical context of the time. And as soon as I saw that we were talking about a match in May of 1962, all I was thinking of was move over, Vickery. This is my time.
Which means that you have to be held responsible for all those cloying string sections, I think.
There are quite a few, and I'm coming on to that. Look, 62, remember, if you say the optimum year for rock and roll was probably 1957.
Yeah.
'56, I think, was a better year, but the optimum year
Well,
for
it takes time to fan out, doesn't it? You know
it
what I mean?
does,
To,
yeah, and then to be popularized and for new players to come into the scene and take the musical genre elsewhere. So by '58, rock and roll was carrying some, some timber. By '59, it is in a state of utter um what would it be? Sanitized limbo, if I can put it that way.
right.
Because then you get all these preppy guys coming in, all these Ricky Nelsons, who's not too bad. I've got time for Ricky Nelson, but everybody else, they were like copies of Elvis before he went into the army. Because Elvis has got into the army and he comes out and he's all sort of like new American boy, but they're going back to the sort of like actually they're not sorry, they're going to the Elvis as a new cut, you know, um,
All round entertainer.
all round entertainment. But I was thinking of the way they look, clean cut. They had
Yeah.
this sort of preppy look, which Elvis had a little bit of when he first came out of the army and stuff like that. So by '62, I mean, rock and roll has died a death, but the record companies are still trying to squeeze whatever life there is left in it. So that explains why Elvis Presley is at #1 with Good Luck Charm. And it's a decent half tune. That's not bad, is it?
It's so slow. It kind of needs
Yeah.
helping out the grooves.
Yeah, you could put it that way. I think it's slow because it's a blues, actually. I get it because he could have gone a bit. Um, this is like Wooden Heart, isn't it? It's come to a point where Elvis is slowing down because the fast pace of rock and roll was fine when he was a 20-year-old, but now he's a little bit more mature and the songs are getting a little bit cleverer, a little bit more poetic. Um, the idea of I want a good luck charm hanging on my arm and that's you. Well, I think that's quite a good and
Mm.
and a lyrical sentiment. I like the slow pace, I actually
Yeah.
like the it's a
Isn't it
good.
amazing that while Elvis is slowing down, Frank Sinatra is sped up?
I've come coming to that. Yeah, well, the twist was all over the place.
Everybody's twisting.
Everybody was
It
twisting,
it's
and
not
he's
as
the
bad
proof
as
of
you
it.
think, is
No,
it?
it's not. No, it's not. Well,
Oh, when I
Frank
saw, because I'd
Sinatra.
never heard this record. Wow, Frank
I
Sinatra, everybody's twisting.
I
This is
was
going to be.
familiar.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. I was very familiar with this tune because every time you want to sort of illustrate how big the twist was at the time, well, you pull out three tracks, which are all in this charts. Sam Cooke's Twisting the Night Away, which
Love it.
isn't bad,
No, I
which
love it. I
isn't
absolutely
bad. You
love
see what I
it.
mean?
Yeah,
Exactly what you say. And then that's at
love
number
it.
28. At number 29 is Everybody's Twisting by Frank Sinatra, which just is the cherry on the cake of the twist. But the originator, no, not the originator, because the originator of the twist, the dance and twist as a popular music theme was Hank Ballard of Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. So he did the original tune called The Twist, which is not to be confused with Let's Twist Again, which is at number 40 in the charts. The Twist was the original song that Chubby Checker covered. And what was missing from Hank Ballard, if you've ever seen them, great doo-wop band, I loved Hank Ballard. I used to
Work with
go,
me, Annie.
that's the one. And the sequel was Annie Had a Baby. So you
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
can
That's
figure
what
out.
they were working at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That is exactly what they were working at. And the oohs between ooh, 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 wee, Annie, how you thrill me. Yeah, that's Hank Ballard. They were a doo-wop band essentially, more kind of like in the R&B underground field. And they were probably, Hank Ballard in particular was probably influential on James Brown's career because that's
Mm.
how he rolled on the stage. He was like all over the place, but he was a skinny little guy, skinny little slim guy, and he didn't have the personality that was needed to carry or to become the father of the twist, as it were. I don't think the record company understood, and maybe not Hank Ballard and the Midnighters either, understood the possible resonance of the song. For them, the twist was just
Yeah.
another song. But then Chubby Checker, took it, or somebody told Chubby Checker, cover that tune, and he had the image, which is of a fat guy, or he's not that fat, really. You know, when I look at myself now, I'm thinking, what? He wasn't that
Yeah,
fat.
I think you've moved the goalposts.
Well, I have, yeah. I'm more on the fats domino sizeometer, but he was chubby rather than fats, and he to look at him doing the twist was the, you know,
Yeah.
that was the giggle, wasn't it? He'd dress up in a sort of dinner suit and everything, and he'd go on a sort of like late night TV talk show, and it'd be this fat guy or chubby guy, not moving that much, still moving though. He has got some dance moves, but not moving his feet that much, but moving his hips and
So and it's not an intimidating thing, is it? And having him as the poster means, yeah, anyone can do this. Let's have a go at
anyway,
this.
yeah, it allows everybody to do it. It's not a black thing anymore because, you know, a chubby black guy is a point of derision, or at least an easy comfort
Oh, I've got to tell you a
point.
story I heard from Berry Gordy, which would have been around this time, maybe a little bit earlier. He's a kid. He's walking around the streets of Detroit selling newspapers. He's selling a black paper, and he has this idea. I know what I'll do. I'll go into a white neighborhood, cleans up, sells loads. Next, so he says to his brother, "Now we got to do this. We got to go back to this white, you know." So next day, him and his brother go. Don't sell anything. He said the lesson he learned from that: one black guy in a white neighborhood is cute. Two is a threat.
Is 100% right in those days.
What a
100%
brilliant
right.
story.
I'll tell you, my hitchhiking days, I remember I was once standing at a péage, which is the toll booth on the French motorways, in a place called Orange. Orange. No, okay, that was the way back. Sorry. But before we get to Orange, going to south, going to the Côte d'Azur, I think I was just outside Marseille or something like that, trying to get to Nice. And there was a black guy standing there, and I was like, "Oh, I better get as far away from him as possible." But you know what happened? A single white woman, young woman, and everything, picked us picked us up, and I think I can't remember what the circumstances. Either she said, "Oh, do you want to jump in?" Oh, the other bloke, he can jump in as well, and took us all the way to Nice. It was like that. But on in Orange, going back up to might have been the same trip, may not have been the same trip. Going back up to the north of France, Paris and whatnot. Orange is in the south. And we stop at a péage, and there are loads of people hitchhiking there. I'll tell you a funny story though. These two girls, I mean, we've been standing there for hours, you know, probably like 20 people by now on a péage. And these two young, sort of like hip girls, probably like 18, 20, they just show up, you know, skimpily dressed, and immediately a car screeches to a
Surprise,
halt.
surprise. Yeah.
Well, they jump in. Then what happens? I'm so pissed off at this point. And then this big truck comes, huge truck comes to the péage. And I see it's a black guy driving. You know, given that this is 1976, maybe, there weren't a huge amount of black truckers on the road. It's a black guy driving. So I literally jump in front because they slow down at the péage.
Yeah.
I jump in front of the péage and I say, "Je suis noir, je suis noir." And the guy goes, "All right, yeah, jump in." And then I see this other black guy who's been standing there for ages. And I say, "Look, how about him? Because he's going up north as well, you know." And the guy goes, "Yeah." So we got to live together. But normally I would stand aloof in those days of another black guy hitchhiking because I just thought, no way are we going to get a lift,
Indeed.
particularly if it's, you know, a woman, like I say. Anyway,
One of the standout things from this chart, 62, is the amount of English Elvis clone or kind of rock and roll. The charts
that's what I
on
was saying
Cliff.
to you.
Cliff
Yeah.
Richard, you know,
Mm.
I actually really like "Do You Want to Dance." It's a
Yeah.
great song. Billy Fury, Adam
Yeah.
Faith.
I'm into them.
There's so many, but there's one who I think stands out. I'd love to know your opinion on him. Eden Kane.
I knew you'd say that. I knew
Yeah.
you'd say Eden Kane. Well, they're all from the same. Look, actually, just give me one moment to just conclude the twisting thing, because at number 41, one place below Chubby Checker's Let's Twist Again, is Norman Vaughan, the comedian who used to say, you know, roses, you know, as in the chocolate roses. He's got Swinging in the Rain. Do you get it? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, which is another kind of twisting song. But yeah, these all of these people were from the Larry Parn stable. Eden Kane was one of those people. Billy Fury was one of those people. Marty Wilde at number
Yeah.
36 with Jezebel was one of those people. You could go through this chart and basically see the influence of the equivalent of Simon, what's his
Ow.
name? Yeah, Simon Cowell nowadays. These are this is his stable of artists, and that tells you something really important. And Joe Brown as well, which A Picture of You is an amazing song, by the way.
It
27. I'm
is.
pretty sure Joe Brown is part of that stable. But you're right. They're copying the likes of Ricky Nelson at number 26 with Young World. I don't think it's his best tune. Ricky Nelson, his biggest success was later on in life. After the rock and roll era died, he, like a lot of rock and rollers, just disappeared off the face of the earth. They couldn't buy a hit if they tried. And he came back in about 1970 something with a tune called Garden Party. It's an amazing little tune. It wasn't so rock and roll. He was always a little bit of a troubadour in any case, although he came from a sort of family TV series drama hit. I think it was Ozzie and Harriet, it was called in those days. But he came back about 1977 or something, this tune, and it got to number one both in the UK and US, called Garden Party. And it was about going to a garden party, presumably at the White House. And, all the old rockers are there. And he says, obviously Chuck Berry's there because he says, yeah, and Johnny B. Good came out of a closet or something like that. And then he says he's put them all in their pseudonyms.
It's a kind of
It was a
American Pie for old rock and rollers.
it was. That's a good way of describing it. But then he goes and dies in a plane crash shortly after
Mm.
that, and so he had a moment in the sunshine after this career
Well,
at this time, then
loads
moved
of
on.
people, these careers, their moment is coming to an end because the Beatles are just about to blow everything away.
Yeah,
And one of
exactly
those who
right.
I think he's talented and he's really got a voice is Eden Kane.
Yeah.
Do you know who he was?
I don't know a huge amount about him. I
Well, I shall
remember.
tell you. He's the oldest of the Sarstep brothers.
Oh, right. Yes, you're right. You're right, actually. I did know that. Or I have known that. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely
So,
right.
and Peter of, where did you go to, my lovely? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
he's involved later on,
yeah.
producing and so on. But he's one of those who I think it's a shame that the Beatles end blasted it all away because you can
Well,
really hear talent there.
I think the biggest shame, that's I don't know why with Eden Kane was at number 18. It's a brilliant it's a brilliant trap. Not sure about a brilliant song, but he you can see the talent. But I think the biggest shame here in the charts of how the Beatles blew this generation away was Helen Shapiro, because
Yeah,
Helen
yeah,
Shapiro was arguably, the Amy
yeah.
Winehouse,
I
or she
wish
was
that
the Amy
I
Winehouse of her
wish that
generation.
she'd have been able to roll with it in a way that Dusty Springfield did, and I think she could have done because
Yeah.
Dusty Springfield rolled with it really, really well
Do you know what?
because she was so aligned with black music.
Exactly.
And she's a
100%.
she's a hero in that respect. When she goes to South Africa and gets kicked out because she refuses to play to segregated audiences and so on. And Helen Shapiro, if and it was capable, and she did some good stuff but it all got lost. Had she rolled with it in the same way that Dusty had done, I think she'd have had a better career.
You basically have displayed the sort of jeopardy there of, or at least you've analysed the jeopardy of many musicians. If you if you get if you break through as a novelty, remember she broke through as a 14-year-old,
Yeah,
talking about big people's business, love, walk away or walk back to happiness and all that. And she was always regarded as the young girl with a big voice. Now, that's okay when you're 14, but when you're, by now,
yeah,
she's probably about 18, 19. Where can you go from
yeah.
there?
It's a
People are still
tough one,
looking at,
isn't it?
yeah,
To
it's
to
like
grow up with your
Lena
audience.
Zavaroni, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like you can never get away from that with Lena Zavaroni. Dusty Springfield wasn't on that tip, but I think the main difference was, like, you're right. Dusty Springfield it was almost as if the Beatles enabled Dusty Springfield as a solo artist,
yeah.
because they had started bringing in the
Well, the
soul music.
Springfields were a kind of folk group that she
They
was in.
totally different. But then the Beatles started bringing in all this soul music or
R&B. Yeah,
Motown music from the United States. And they were poppifying it, making it palatable, so that there wasn't the same um, maybe dysfunction between black music and white popular music as there was more so in America. You know, we didn't quite
Yeah,
have that
yeah,
challenge here. And the Beatles made it almost palatable. I mean, when you look at that first couple of Beatles albums, the likes of you know the songs that they're singing there, Please Mr. Postman, Shout, Isley Brothers, you know, you look at that and you think, flipping out, this must have been the they managed to do it without it being, going back to that Berry Gordy anecdote that you said, without scaring off white folks. So Dusty Springfield then, who was iconically a um, European singer, iconically a British singer, a white, blonde-haired, or you know, false blonde, but nevertheless, British singer, was able to go to Memphis,
yeah,
where all the Stax group were,
and be
and do
respected.
yeah, and do an album which is still today one of the
Yeah.
finest albums, black, white, soul, pop, whatever you want to call it, that she's
There's
done.
quite a lot of jazz around as well, because I think we forget how important jazz was. And again, that's another thing that the Beatles kind of blew it away. That on the first, I'm fascinated with this. The first ruck in English youth culture, it's not mods and rockers or anything like
No,
that.
yeah, yeah,
It's the Bewley Jazz Festival
yeah,
when Bilk comes on, and there's a ruck between the trads and the mod jazz,
yeah, yeah,
the mods.
yeah.
Fucking brilliant, you know. And jazz had a real power, and Bilk's in there, Kenny Ball and his jazz in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Also, Dave Brubeck, Unsquare
Yes,
Dance. That
yes.
experiment that Dave Brubeck goes when he
Of
goes all around
course,
the world and looks at
mate.
different time codes.
It's almost as if we were thinking the same thing as we went through this chart, you know, because I would say of those, Bilk is the most significant, because Stranger on the Shore is just one of those iconic tunes. The moment that you hear it, you know what it is. And the image of Bilk playing his licorice stick, you know, with a bowler hat and the striped, and if you're lucky enough to know what he sounds like with a West Country accent, the image just stays with you forever. Kenny Ball was riding on the coattails. There was a kind of a British jazz, what do they call it in those days? I can't remember what they called the movement that was going on in those days, but there was a Brit jazz thing before the Brit jazz funk of the late 70s and early 80s. There was a Brit jazz thing which was spearheaded by the likes of Bilk and Kenny Ball. Dave Brubeck, I just think it's brilliant to see him in the charts, because yeah, he was a bit too experimental otherwise for a lot of people until he came out with, of course,
And
Take
do you know
Five.
there's a an English Johnny Mathis in the charts who
Is
is
that John
actually
Layton?
South African.
Is that Johnny Layton?
No, Johnny Layton was in The Great Escape. He became an actor
Yeah.
afterwards. Danny Williams, Wonderful
Yes,
World of the Young.
I forgot
The,
about that. I
the
always thought of
English,
him as English.
yeah, the English Johnny Mathis,
Yeah.
and he's not. He's South African. It's a little bit like England taking credit for Dotun Adebayo.
Well, you could say that.
Cultural
Oh,
theft.
no, it's not. No, it's not.
He's a black South African.
I'm not South African, by the way, but thank you. There is so many other interesting stories going on in these
There are.
charts. You know,
There
you
are.
you start you started off by saying, well, do you take credit for all the sort of soporific violins and
The string
everything?
sections, yeah, the
Yeah,
cloying string sections, they're all over the place.
well, they might be, but look at number two, Nut Rocker, B Bumble and the Stingers. Do you not
Yeah,
think that's an amazing instrumental there?
yeah,
That
yeah.
has
And
laid the
I
way.
like Wonderful Life by the Shads as well. I'm all
Yes,
in favour of it.
yes. And then Brenda Lee at number seven is the American
What a
equivalent
voice!
of Helen
What a little.
Shapiro, but
Yeah, well,
she's
I think in a way, Brenda Lee is the
pretty number
equivalent
seven.
of Mario Zagallo. Because how high is Brenda Lee?
Oh, number
You
seven.
know,
She's number
yeah, but
seven.
but no,
Oh,
how tall is she?
4 foot, yeah, four
Exactly.
foot something.
Absolute pocket
Yeah.
dynamite. And that is also Mario Zagallo, the little ant, tiny little fella, but an absolute giant. So I think everything ties together.
Let me give a quick shout out to Bruce Chanel.
Oh yeah,
See, they
yeah.
describe him as Channel here, but I'm sure his
Chanel, yeah,
surname.
Pro Chanel.
Yeah, I thought
Do
it
you
was.
know that song, "Hey Baby"? It's a great song.
It's a brilliant song,
It
isn't it?
has an influence on "Love Me Do" that the Beatles are just about to record.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear
The
that.
harmonica, The harmonica. Lennon hears that
right.
harmonica sound
Yeah.
and thinks, that sounds great. Why don't we have some of that?
And the beat was the same, wasn't it? The tempo's exactly the same. Hey, hey, yeah, baby, love, love me do. Yeah, I can hear it now.
Yeah,
Exactly. Oh
it's all
wow.
there.
I didn't realize that was, you know more about this than you're supposed to. And we've also got to
It's my time
mention.
as well, even though
Yeah.
I was minus
Well, you're a
three.
little bit younger than me, and so I can tutor you in this respect. But we've got to also mention number 17, Come Outside, Mike Song with Wendy
Come
Richard.
outside.
Exactly.
Why? It's cold out there. I wonder what was on Mike Sarn's mind there
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
a young and very
But
glamorous
it
Wendy
was,
Richards.
oh, she was, wasn't it? But
He was,
remember, this is still a time when you don't hear like Cockney voice, you don't hear working class voices too
yeah,
much in the pop charts. And this was so working class. It became like a humorous thing, didn't it?
yeah.
Whereas actually, I would think it was the British equivalent of It's Cold Outside. It's Cold Outside
Yes,
is
yes,
treated as a much more sinister song, though.
yes.
Much more sinister song. So they decided to let's go for the humor, come
Yeah.
in.
Mhm.
And she can't sing, obviously, but she's not trying to. And what else? Well, Lonnie Donegan's there, and I think this is like about the end for Lonnie Donegan in terms of chart hits. The Party's Over, ironically, title at number 19. You got Roy Orbison in there, not his best track, Dream Baby, not a bad one, but not by a long shot his best one. King of the Clowns, Neil Sedaka. So we're
But
immediately
the
seeing.
Big O was so good that he was able to ride the Beatles wave, wasn't he? And he had a career
But,
afterwards as
but you know
well. So
why?
good he was.
But you know why? He came over here. He came and stayed. He had, if I'm not mistaken, a Saturday night primetime TV show on the BBC, I think it was. I could be wrong about the channel, but he came over here and did the groundwork. And I suppose he rode the wave like Gene Vincent did. Gene Vincent ran out of material, though. He rode the wave of a few of the 50s uh, American pop stars who realized that there was still work for them in the UK, even when America turned its back on rock and roll. American audiences, Black American audiences, particularly Black American audiences, I would say, are guilty of um, just never curating the music that they create, or rarely. I think it's changed now, but certainly in the 1950s, 1960s, rarely curating the music that we create. So, blues comes out of the Black tradition. You can't find anybody in the States playing blues or patronizing blues nowadays. So a lot of the blues musicians had to go to Europe, to places like Holland and Belgium and Scandinavia. But I saw a load of blues guys in the 70s. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, John Lee Hooker, he had a second lease of life in when I lived in Los Angeles in 1990, and I interviewed him there. But I'd seen him a few times in Europe before. I remember Johnny Hooker playing at a place called Maria Hyssen in Stockholm, for example. But all over Europe, I saw Buddy Guy. I saw oh gosh, there are so many artists I could name you and they were literally just doing the grand tour of Europe, because where could they get a gig in the United States when people had moved on? Yeah, what else can we say? Unfortunately, Pat Boone's in there. Quando, Quando, Quando. Glad to see that, and that's number 45. I'm glad to see Dwayne Eddy, the twanging guitar is
Me
deep in the,
too. Well,
yeah, deep.
it's the highlight of my professional career, saying to him live on air, spank that plank.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
He liked it when I said twang that thing. He was a
I know.
little bit when I said spank that plank. I don't think he considered fully the masturbatory potential of the guitar.
You leave him alone. But it's true. I remember that occasion. I was there live in the studio. I can vouch. Vickery did say to the great Dwayne Eddy, Dwayne Eddy even, spank that plank. That was a moment and a half. And there's a slow twisting from Chubby Checkies, running out of twisting motifs, obviously. I think it's a fascinating chart.
Yeah, it is.
Really
It was a
do.
fascinating time to be alive. Just
Well,
the great David Kinniston, social historian. He's doing this series of books from 45 to 79. He's got up to 65 so far. And one of the book is just devoted to 62, and it's called on the cusp. And that's what you feel like. We are on the cusp
musically,
of
definitely.
modernity, musically and in football as well. And that's the thing that Mario Zagallo represents. We're on the cusp of modernity.
I think it's been a brilliant tribute to Zagallo. I hope he'd appreciate the musical second half as well. We've been talking about the game between Brazil and Mexico on the 30th of May 1962. Features Pele, also features the, I suppose, subject of our Brazilian Shirt Name podcast this time around, Mario Zagallo. Brilliant watch, if you can. You can only see a few minutes of it online as far as I see, but it definitely is worth watching. Tim, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Let's do this again sometime.
I look forward to it.